My wife threw boiling coffee at my chest because I refused to fund her son's gambling addiction. She screamed at me to give them the money or get out of my own house. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was just a senile old man who would sign the checks to buy a little peace and quiet. But 48 hours later, she came home to changed locks, an empty bank account, and a lawyer standing in the driveway with an eviction notice. She didn't know that while she was screaming, I was already planning my silence. Before I tell you how I dismantled their entire lives without raising my voice, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Thomas Blackwood. I am 70 years old, and I am a retired general contractor in Seattle. I have spent 50 years of my life pouring concrete framing houses in the rain and building a fortune with my own two hands. I know the value of $1 because I have bled for every single one of them. But apparently, that was a lesson I failed to teach the people living under my roof. It was a Tuesday morning, a typical gray Seattle day, with rain lashing against the panoramic windows of the kitchen I had paid for. I was sitting at the granite island, drinking my black coffee and reading the paper, when Brandon, my 28-year-old stepson, slid a tablet in front of me. His eyes were wide with that manic desperation I had seen too many times before. "Check this out." "Tom," Brandon said, his voice cracking with excitement. "It is a new coin. It is going to the moon. I just need $50,000 for the initial buy-in. We can triple it by Friday." I looked at the screen. It was nonsense. Just another crypto scheme with a funny name. I looked up at Brandon. He was wearing a designer hoodie that cost more than my first car. He had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. He called himself an entrepreneur, but in my day, we called it unemployed. I pushed the tablet back. "No, Brandon." "What do you mean, no?" he asked, his smile faltering. "I mean no," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "I am not giving you $50,000 to gamble on internet money. You are 28 years old. If you want to invest, go get a job." That is when the atmosphere in the room shifted. My wife Lydia was standing by the espresso machine. She is 55, beautiful in that high-maintenance way that costs me $5,000 a month. When I married her 5 years ago, I thought she loved me for my stability. Now I know she just loved the credit limit on my American Express card. She turned around slowly. Her eyes were cold. "Tom, do not be difficult," she said. Her voice was low, a warning tone she used when she wanted to manipulate me. "Brandon is trying to build a future. You have millions sitting in those accounts doing nothing. Why are you so selfish?" "Selfish," I repeated. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not from heart trouble, but from the sheer audacity of it. "Lydia, I was up on scaffolding at 5 a.m. when I was his age. I was carrying drywall up 4 flights of stairs until my back felt like it was snapping. That money is my blood. It is my sweat. It is not for playing games." Brandon slammed his hand on the counter. "You are such a dinosaur. Tom, you do not understand how the modern world works. You are just a bitter old man sitting on a pile of gold waiting to die." I stood up. I am 6'2". I might be 70, but I am still built like the man who framed half the suburbs in King County. Brandon flinched. He was a coward. But Lydia was not. She stepped between us. Her face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before. It was the face of a woman whose mask had finally slipped. "Give him the money, Tom," she hissed. "No," I said. "And this is the last time I am saying it. Get a job or get out." That was the moment everything changed. I saw Lydia's hand move. It was a blur. She grabbed the ceramic mug from the counter, the one she had just filled with fresh steaming coffee, and she swung it. She did not throw the coffee. She threw the mug. The hot liquid hit me first, splashing across my chest and neck, soaking instantly into my flannel shirt. Then the ceramic mug struck my collarbone and shattered. The pain was immediate. It was a searing, white-hot shock that took my breath away. But as the heat spread across my skin, something strange happened in my mind. I did not scream, I did not yell. Instead, the pain took me back 40 years. I suddenly remembered the summer of 1982. I was working on a foundation pour in downtown Seattle. A hose on the concrete pump had burst. Wet concrete sprayed all over my arm. If you know anything about construction, you know that wet concrete causes chemical burns. It eats your skin. I remembered the burning sensation then, the way my skin peeled raw, the way I had to wrap it in gauze and go back to work the next day, because if I did not work, my family did not eat. I remembered the pain of a nail going through my boot. I remembered the frostbite on my fingers during the winter of '96. I looked down at the coffee stains spreading on my shirt. It was dark and ugly. My chest was throbbing. My skin was already blistering. But compared to what I had endured to earn that money, this was nothing. This was just a stain. Lydia stood there, her chest heaving. For a second, she looked shocked at what she had done. But then she saw Brandon watching her, and she doubled down. She had to win. "Look what you made me do," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Why do you have to be so stubborn?" "You provoked me," Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, cruel sound. "Yeah, Tom. Look at you. You are a mess. Just give us the card, and we can forget this happened." I stood there dripping wet. The smell of roasted coffee was suffocating. I looked at the woman I had promised to cherish. I looked at the stepson I had tried to mentor. I realized then that they did not see a husband or a father. They saw a broken ATM machine. They thought that by humiliating me, by hurting me physically, they could force the cash drawer to open. I looked Lydia dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not wipe the coffee from my chin. I said absolutely nothing. The silence stretched out. It was heavy. It was suffocating. Lydia shifted her weight. She expected me to yell. She expected me to fight back so she could play the victim, so she could cry and say I was aggressive. But I gave her nothing. I simply turned around. I walked out of the kitchen past the living room with the Italian leather sofas, past the grand piano, nobody played, and into the hallway. "Where are you going?" Lydia screamed after me. "Do not, you walk away from me, Thomas." I kept walking. I went into the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, calculated rage that was beginning to settle in my gut. I unbuttoned my shirt. The skin on my chest was angry red, peeling in places. It would scar. Good, I thought. Let it scar. I want to remember this. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the gray hair. I saw the wrinkles around my eyes. But I also saw the eyes of the man who had survived recessions, lawsuits, and unions. "They made a mistake today," I whispered to my reflection. "They thought they were attacking an old man. They forgot they were attacking a builder. And a builder knows that when a house is rotten to the core, you do not patch it up. You condemn it, and then you bulldoze it to the ground." I washed the burn with cold water, dried myself off, and walked to my study. I did not go back to the kitchen. I could hear them whispering loudly, laughing nervously, probably telling themselves they had won, that I was in here licking my wounds, and that I would emerge with the checkbook in hand just to keep the peace. I sat down at my heavy oak desk. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a burner phone I kept for emergencies. I did not call the police. Not yet. That would be too easy. That would give them a chance to spin a story. Instead, I dialed a number I had not called in years. "Mr. Harrison speaking." A voice answered on the second ring. "Harrison, it is Tom Blackwood," I said. My voice was steady, flat, like a piece of leveled steel. "Tom, good to hear from you. How is the retirement treating you?" "It is over, Harrison," I said. "I need you to open the file. The one we talked about when I got married." The scorched earth file. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, heavy pause. Then the tone of the lawyer changed. He was no longer a friend. He was a shark smelling blood. I understand, Mr. Blackwood. When do we start? Right now, I said, looking at the door of my study where Lydia was now pounding her fist, demanding I come out. Right now. The lock of the bathroom door clicked shut with a heavy metallic sound that echoed in the small tiled space. It was the only barrier between me and the madness unfolding in my own kitchen. I leaned against the heavy oak door for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My chest was on fire. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and in its place came a throbbing, stinging pain that radiated from my collarbone down to my sternum. I could hear footsteps pacing frantically on the other side of the wood. It was Lydia. She was not leaving. She was not giving me space. She was doing what she always did, which was twisting reality until she was the victim and I was the villain. "Tom, open this door right now," Lydia shouted. Her voice was muffled, but I could hear the tremor in it. Not a tremor of guilt, but a tremor of indignation. "You are being so dramatic, Tom. It was just a little coffee. You are acting like I shot you. Open the door so we can talk about this like adults." I pushed myself away from the door and walked over to the sink. My hands were shaking. I gripped the cold porcelain edges of the basin and looked up at the mirror. The man staring back at me looked older than I remembered. His eyes were wide and watery. His skin was pale. I looked down at my shirt. The flannel was soaked dark brown, and it was clinging to my skin. I began to unbutton it slowly. Every movement hurt. The fabric had cooled, but the liquid underneath was still scalding my skin. I peeled the shirt away and hissed through my teeth. The skin underneath was angry red and blistering in patches. It looked like a map of pain drawn right over my heart. I turned on the cold water tap. As the water rushed out, I cupped my hands and splashed it onto my chest. The relief was instant but fleeting. As the cold water hit my skin, memories flooded back to me uninvited. They were memories of a different life, a different pain, and a different woman. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I was not in this multi-million-dollar mansion. I was back in our first tiny apartment in Renton. It was 1985. I had come home with my hands torn apart by rebar because I had forgotten my gloves. My first wife, Sarah, was there. She did not ask about the money. She did not scream at me for being careless. She had taken my rough, bleeding hands in hers. She had kissed the calluses. She had cleaned the wounds with a tenderness that made me want to cry. Sarah used to say that my scars were the receipts of our life together. She treated every bruise I brought home as a badge of honor. She loved the man who built the house, not the house itself. But Sarah was gone. Cancer took her 10 years ago and left me with a hole in my chest that I had tried to fill with work and money, and eventually I tried to fill it with Lydia. I looked at the mirror again. What a fool I had been. I thought I could buy companionship. I thought that if I provided a life of luxury, I would earn loyalty in return. But standing there with a burn on my chest, inflicted by the woman who wore my diamond ring, I realized the transaction was fraudulent. I had given everything, and I had received nothing but contempt. Outside the door, Lydia switched tactics. The aggression in her voice melted into a wheedling, manipulative whine. "Tom, please," she said, and I could hear her leaning against the door. "You know I have high blood pressure. You know the doctor said I cannot handle stress. When you yelled at Brandon, you triggered my anxiety. I did not mean to throw the cup. My hand just slipped because I was shaking so much. You scared me, Tom. You are so big and intimidating when you get angry." I froze. Intimidating. Me. I had never raised a hand to a woman in my life. I had just stood there and said no. But in Lydia's world, saying no to her demands was an act of aggression. She was rewriting history in real time. She was turning my refusal to be robbed into an assault on her fragile nerves. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I opened that door now, she would be crying. She would be the one needing comfort. And 10 minutes later, I would be the one apologizing for making her upset. "Not this time, Lydia," I whispered to the mirror. "Not this time." I took a towel and soaked it in cold water, pressing it against the burn. The silence from my side of the door was driving her crazy. She needed a reaction. She needed fuel for her fire. When I did not give it to her, then she began to panic. "Tom, say something," she shrieked. "You are doing this on purpose. You are trying to punish me with silence." This is emotional abuse, Thomas. The irony was so thick I could taste it. She had physically assaulted me, but I was the abuser because I would not speak to her. I looked at the luxury bath products lined up on the counter. The imported soaps, the expensive lotions, all paid for by the sweat of a man she despised. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It was the death of my marriage. It was not a loud explosion. It was just a quiet realization that I was sleeping next to an enemy. Suddenly, there was a massive crash against the door. The wood splintered slightly around the frame. I jumped back, dropping the towel. Brandon's voice boomed through the door, loud and entitled. "Hey, open the damn door, old man! Another kick!" The door shuddered in its frame. Brandon was wearing heavy boots. "Don't you ignore my mother," Brandon screamed. "You are in there pouting like a child, while my mom is out here crying. Do you hear me? You made her cry." I stood very still. I could hear Lydia sobbing theatrically in the background, playing her part to perfection. "Mom, don't worry, I will handle him," Brandon said, his voice dripping with false bravado. He kicked the door again, harder this time. Bam! "Open up, Tom!" Brandon yelled. "We are not done here. You think you can just walk away? You think you can just hide in the bathroom and keep your money? That is not how this works. We are a family, and in this family, we help each other. So you are going to come out here, you are going to apologize to my mother for scaring her, and then you are going to write that check." I looked at the lock. It was strong, but it would not hold forever. Brandon was young, and he was fueled by the rage of a spoiled child who had never been told no. "Give me the money, or I swear to God I will break this door down," Brandon shouted. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror one last time. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. In their place was something cold and sharp. It was the look of a man who was done negotiating. I carefully folded the wet towel. I buttoned my ruined shirt back up, wincing, as the fabric touched the raw skin. I did not fix my hair. I did not wipe the soot from my neck. I wanted them to see exactly what they had done. I walked toward the door. I did not reach for the lock. Not yet. I waited for one more kick, one more insult, one more piece of evidence that these people did not love me. "Come on, old man," Brandon taunted. "Stop being a coward." I placed my hand on the doorknob. My grip was firm. My hand was steady. I was a contractor. I knew how to build things, and I knew how to demolish them. And as I turned the lock, I knew that the demolition had just begun. The sun that filtered through the blinds the next morning was cruel in its brightness. I had spent the night in the guest room, lying awake on a mattress that felt too soft, staring at the ceiling and feeling the burn on my chest throb in time with my heartbeat. Every time I shifted, the raw skin rubbed against the cotton undershirt I had worn to protect the sheets, reminding me that the violence of the previous night had not been a nightmare. It was my new reality. I finally got out of bed around 8. My body felt stiff the way it used to feel after a double shift pouring concrete in the winter. But this was a stiffness born of betrayal, not honest labor. I walked down the hallway, moving quietly out of habit. The house was silent, but as I approached the kitchen, I smelled something that made my stomach turn. It was the smell of bacon frying. It was the sweet, heavy scent of maple syrup and freshly ground coffee. For 5 years, Lydia had never cooked breakfast. Not once. She claimed the smell of grease ruined her hair and that she was not a short-order cook. We always had a housekeeper who came in at 9 or we went out to brunch at the country club. But today, the kitchen smelled like a commercial for a happy family. I stopped in the doorway. The scene before me was so perfectly staged it looked like a set design. Lydia was standing by the stove wearing a floral apron over a silk dress. Her hair was perfectly blow-dried, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. She was humming a tune, flipping pancakes with a spatula, as if she had not been screaming like a banshee less than 12 hours ago. "Good morning, darling," she said, turning to face me. Her voice was light and airy, completely devoid of the venom she had spat at me the night before. "I made your favorite. Blueberry pancakes and crispy bacon. Just the way you like it." I stood there gripping the doorframe. My eyes went immediately to the coffee pot sitting on the counter. The weapon. It was cleaned and full of fresh brew. She saw me looking at it, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. "Come sit down, Tom," she said, pulling out a chair at the island. "I poured you a glass of orange juice, freshly squeezed." I walked into the room slowly. I felt like I was walking onto a construction site where the safety inspections had been faked. Everything looked solid, but one wrong step, and the floor would give way. I sat down. As she moved closer to place the plate in front of me, a scent hit my nostrils. It was not the smell of bacon. It was perfume. Specifically, it was the bottle of French perfume I had bought her for our 5th anniversary 2 months ago. It cost $300 an ounce. It was a heavy floral scent that she usually saved for galas and charity dinners. Why was she wearing evening perfume at 8 in the morning to fry bacon? I looked at her face. She had applied makeup carefully concealing any signs of stress or anger. Her lips were painted a soft pink. She placed a hand on my shoulder and I flinched. The touch felt like ice. "Tom, I want to apologize for last night," she began, her voice dropping to a whisper. I was out of my mind with worry. "I did not mean to hurt you. I hope you know that." I picked up a fork and poked at the pancakes. I did not eat. I just watched her perform. "What changed, Lydia?" I asked. My voice was raspy. "Last night I was a selfish old dinosaur. Today I get pancakes. What is the script for today?" She sighed, a long, tragic exhale that she must have practiced in the mirror. "I was trying to protect you, Tom," she said, sitting down next to me. "I did not want to burden you with the truth because I know how much you value your peace. But I cannot hide it anymore. Brandon is not investing in crypto." I looked up. Here it comes, I thought. The pivot. "Then what is the money for?" I asked. Lydia looked around the empty kitchen as if checking for wiretaps, then leaned in close. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating me now, mixing with the smell of breakfast in a nauseating combination. "He is in trouble, Tom. Serious trouble. He borrowed money from some bad people. Loan sharks. Russian guys who run gambling rings downtown. They told him if he does not have 50,000 by tomorrow noon, they are going to hurt him. They threatened to break his legs." She grabbed my hand. Her palms were sweaty. "That is why I was so hysterical," she continued, tears welling up in her eyes on cue. "I was not angry at you. I was terrified for my son. Please, Tom. I know he has made mistakes. I know he is irresponsible. But his life is in danger. We have to save him." I looked at her deep into her eyes, searching for a shred of honesty. But I did not find it. What I found was calculation. As she cried about her son's safety, her eyes were not looking at my face. They were darting down to the leather wallet I had placed on the marble counter. She was staring at it with a hunger that had nothing to do with maternal instinct. She was mentally counting the credit cards inside. My mind raced. I knew the Seattle underworld. I had worked in this city for 50 years. I knew plenty of tough guys, and I knew how loan sharks operated. They did not lend 50 grand to a kid like Brandon without collateral, and they certainly did not wait until the last minute to make threats. This story was lazy. It was a bad movie plot she had cooked up overnight thinking I was senile enough to swallow it. But I needed time. My lawyer Harrison needed 24 hours to move the assets and set up the trust. If I said no now, the conflict would explode again, and I might not get out of this house with my wallet. I took a deep breath. I decided to give them the performance they wanted. If his life is in danger, that changes things, I said slowly, forcing the words out. I cannot let the boy get hurt. Lydia's head snapped up. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of triumph. Oh, Tom, thank you, she breathed, squeezing my hand. I knew you would understand. I knew you would not let us down. Can you write a check? Or maybe a wire transfer is faster. I pulled my hand away gently. I need to check which account has the liquidity, I said. Most of my cash is tied up in bonds right now. Give me a few hours to make some calls to the bank. Of course, she said, smiling. Take your time, just as long as we have it by tomorrow. At that moment, the back door opened and Brandon walked in. He was wearing sunglasses indoors and holding an energy drink. He looked remarkably relaxed for someone whose legs were about to be broken by the Russian mob. He strolled over to the counter and grabbed a piece of crispy bacon from my plate without asking. Morning, he mumbled, chewing with his mouth open. Lydia shot him a look, a sharp, meaningful glare that said, "Play the part, idiot." Brandon froze. He looked at me, then back at his mother. He saw the relaxed posture of Lydia, and he realized the hook was in. A smirk spread across his face. Mom told you everything, he asked, his voice dripping with fake somberness. Yeah, man, it is bad. These guys are crazy. I am really scared, Tom. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had tried to teach how to drive, the boy I had tried to teach how to frame a wall. He was mocking me. He thought I was the stupidest man alive. I will see what I can do, Brandon, I said, keeping my face neutral. Brandon looked at Lydia, and then he did it. The gesture that sealed their fate. The gesture that erased the last tiny microscopic shred of doubt I might have had. He winked at her. It was a quick, subtle movement of his left eye, a signal between accomplices, a victory lap before the race was even finished. That wink said, we got him. That wink said, the old man is soft. That wink said, we own him. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut, heavier than the concrete I used to pour. They were not scared. They were laughing at me. They were eating my food, living in my house, and laughing at my expense. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. Where are you going? Lydia asked quickly, anxiety creeping back into her voice. I am going to the study, I said, picking up my wallet. If I am going to get you that money, I need to find my checkbook, and I need to make those calls. Brandon grinned. You are the man, Tom. Seriously, you are saving my life. I looked at him one last time. I looked at the designer sunglasses, the smug smile, the complete lack of respect. You are right, Brandon, I said. I am going to save a life today. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling their eyes on my back. They thought I was going to save Brandon. They did not know that the life I was going to save was my own. I walked straight to my study and locked the door. I did not look for my checkbook. I sat down at my desk and pulled out the folder Harrison had sent me via courier an hour ago. It was the paperwork for the irrevocable trust. I picked up my pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name on the bottom line. Thomas J. Blackwood. With that signature, the house they were standing in, the cars they drove, and the accounts they were drooling over were no longer mine to give. They belonged to the trust now, and the trust had very strict rules about who could live on the property. I looked at the camera feed on my laptop screen. I could see them in the kitchen. Lydia and Brandon were high-fiving. They were hugging. They were celebrating their big win. Enjoy the pancakes, I whispered to the screen. because they are the last expensive meal you are ever going to eat on my dime. I loaded my golf clubs into the trunk of the Cadillac Escalade with a deliberate slowness. I made sure Lydia was watching from the living room window. I wanted her to see the defeated slump of my shoulders. I wanted her to believe that her performance at breakfast had worked, and that I was heading to the country club to blow off some steam before capitulating to her demands. I backed the car out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires, and gave a little wave to the window. It was the wave of a beaten man. I drove down the long, winding driveway of our gated community and turned left onto the main road. But I did not go to the club. I did not go to the bank. I drove 3 blocks down and pulled into the parking lot of a deserted park. I sat there for 20 minutes, checking my watch, waiting for the coast to clear. My heart was not pounding. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. The rhythm of a predator lying in wait. When I was sure they would be settling back into their routine thinking, I was gone for at least 4 hours, I turned the car around. I did not drive back to the front gate. I drove to the service entrance at the back of the property, a narrow lane used by the landscapers and the pool guys. I parked the truck behind a cluster of thick cedar trees where it could not be seen from the house. I slipped into the property through the side gate which I had installed myself 10 years ago. It had a silent latch. I walked quietly across the damp grass, avoiding the gravel paths that would crunch under my feet. My destination was not the house. It was the detached garage. The garage had always been my sanctuary. It was where I kept my tools, my workbench, and the vintage Mustang I was restoring. But lately it had become Brandon's dumping ground. He used it to store his unused gym equipment, his boxes of failed business ventures, and his trash. Brandon was too lazy to walk the recycling to the curb. He just piled it up in the garage until the housekeeper dealt with it. I slipped inside through the side door. The air in the garage was cold and smelled of gasoline and stale beer. I pulled on a pair of heavy work gloves from my bench, the same gloves I used to wear when I was framing houses in the winter. They felt good on my hands, familiar. They were armor. I walked over to the blue recycling bin in the corner. It was overflowing. Brandon was not just lazy, he was arrogant. He believed that once something left his hand, it ceased to exist. He did not shred documents. He did not burn evidence. He just threw it away, assuming that nobody would ever dare to look. I started digging. The top layer was disgusting. Pizza boxes with crusts still inside, empty cans of energy drinks, protein powder containers. The detritus of a man-child who consumed everything and produced nothing. I moved the trash aside methodically. I was looking for paper. I was looking for the truth. Halfway down the bin, I found a crumpled ball of receipts. I picked it up and smoothed it out on top of a pizza box. It was from a place called the Sapphire Room. I knew it. It was a high-end nightclub downtown, the kind of place where you paid $500 just to sit down. I looked at the date. It was from 2 nights ago. The night Brandon was supposedly terrified for his life. The night he was allegedly hiding from Russian loan sharks. I looked at the itemized list. VIP table fee $2,000. Grey Goose Magnum $600. Champagne 3 bottles $1,500. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest. This was his emergency. This was the life and death situation. He was not paying off a debt. He was financing a party. He was popping bottles of champagne while I was icing the burns on my chest. I kept digging. I found another receipt. This one was from a luxury car rental agency. He had put down a deposit on a Lamborghini Huracan for the upcoming weekend. The deposit was $5,000. Charged to a credit card I did not recognize, which meant he had probably opened it in my name using my social security number. So that was the plan. Get the 50 grand from me, pay off the credit card bill for the party, and then rent a supercar to impress his friends. It was pathetic. It was greedy. But it was not surprising. But then my hand brushed against something else at the bottom of the bin. It was a glossy piece of paper that had been torn in half and crumpled tightly. I pulled it out. I carefully unfolded the two halves and pieced them together on my workbench. It was a brochure. The colors were muted and depressing pastels. The text was in a large, friendly font designed for failing eyes. Silver Meadows, Assisted Living and Memory Care. I stared at the brochure. The air in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silver Meadows. I knew this place. I had been a contractor on a renovation project there 15 years ago. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. It was the cheapest facility in the state. It smelled of urine and bleach and boiled cabbage. The staff were underpaid and overworked. The residents were sedated and left in wheelchairs in front of televisions for 12 hours a day. It was a place you sent someone when you wanted them to be forgotten, when you wanted them to die quickly and cheaply. I looked at the handwritten notes in the margins of the brochure. They were in Lydia's handwriting. She had circled the price for the shared room option, the cheapest one, $800 a month. Next to it, she had written a date, next Monday. My knees felt weak. I had to lean against the workbench to keep from falling. This was not just about money anymore. This was an extraction plan. They were not just planning to rob me. They were planning to dispose of me. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a nail gun. The fake concern about my health. The constant gaslighting about me being confused or forgetful. The suggestion that I should rest more. They were building a case. They were going to claim I was incompetent. They were going to claim I was senile. And then once they had the money, once they had the power of attorney that Brandon's fake lawyer friend was bringing over, they were going to dump me at Silver Meadows. I would be locked away in a room with a stranger eating mush while they drove my cars and lived in my house. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling in the gloves, not from fear, but from a realization so dark it made me nauseous. My wife did not just hate me. She was actively plotting my end. She had looked at the life we built and decided that I was the only thing standing in the way of her happiness. To her, I was not a person. I was an obstacle. I was debris that needed to be cleared from the job site. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of gasoline and old dust. It cleared my head. I picked up the receipts. I picked up the brochure. I folded them carefully and placed them in the inside pocket of my jacket, next to my heart. I was not going to Silver Meadows. I looked around the garage one last time. This was my domain. I had built this, and I would be damned if I let a couple of grifters throw me into the trash like I was one of these pizza boxes. I peeled off the work gloves and threw them back onto the bench. I did not need them anymore. The work I had to do now did not require protection. It required precision. I slipped back out the side door into the gray Seattle morning. The golf game was definitely off. I had a much more important appointment to keep. I had to meet a lawyer, and I had to start digging a grave. Not for me, but for the life they thought they were going to have. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, echoing through the silent house like a countdown. I was sitting in my leather armchair in the living room waiting. Lydia and Brandon were pacing around, moving furniture and adjusting the lighting, trying to set the stage for their little play. They had told me that a top-tier financial attorney named Mark was coming over to help us structure the asset transfer to protect me from the so-called Russian mob. They told me he was a specialist in crisis management. I just nodded and played with the fringe of the blanket on my lap, staring at my hands as if I were trying to remember how fingers worked. I was not nervous. I was insulted. Did they really think that a man who had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts with union reps and city planners for 4 decades would not be able to spot a hustle when it walked through the front door? When the doorbell finally rang, Brandon practically sprinted to answer it. I heard the murmur of hushed voices in the foyer, a quick exchange of instructions before the performance began. Then they walked into the living room. "Grandpa here is the man I was telling you about," Brandon said, his voice too loud and too cheerful. "This is Mark. He is going to save our bacon." I looked up slowly. I squinted my eyes, not because my vision was bad, but because I wanted to scrutinize the creature standing on my Persian rug. Mark was a man in his late 30s with slicked back hair and a suit that fit him like a sleeping bag. It was a cheap polyester blend, the kind that shines under the lights and makes a swishing sound when you move. He was carrying a briefcase that looked empty. "Mr. Blackwood." "It is an honor," Mark said, extending a hand. I took it. His grip was limp and his palms were damp, but it was his fingernails that gave him away. They were dirty. There was black grit under the nails of his index and middle fingers. I knew that grit. That was mechanic grease or garden soil. It was not the hand of a man who spent his days handling legal briefs in a high-rise office. It was the hand of a guy who probably fixed transmissions in his driveway on weekends. I looked down at his shoes. They were black dress shoes, but the heels were worn down to the nub on the outside edge, and there was dried mud caked on the instep. A lawyer charging $500 an hour does not walk into a client's house with mud on his shoes. "Nice to meet you, Mark," I said, my voice trembling slightly on purpose. "Brandon says you are very expensive." Mark laughed nervously, glancing at Brandon for reassurance. "Quality costs money, Mr. Blackwood. But freedom is priceless, right?" Lydia ushered us into the dining room. She had set the table with bottled water and a notepad. She sat close to me, too close, radiating that cloying fake warmth she had been projecting all day. Mark sat opposite us and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a single thick document stapled at the top. "So here's the situation," Mark began, speaking fast. "We need to move your liquid assets and the deed to this house into a holding shell immediately. These loan sharks can put a lien on your property by tomorrow morning if we do not act fast. This document is a standard durable power of attorney. It gives Brandon full legal authority to act on your behalf just for this transaction. Once the danger passes, we transfer everything back. Simple." He slid the document across the polished mahogany table. I put on my reading glasses. I took my time. I read the header. General durable power of attorney. It was not limited to a specific transaction. It was a blanket grant of authority. It gave Brandon the right to sell, buy, lease, and mortgage my property. It gave him access to my medical records. It gave him the power to admit me to residential facilities. It was the key to my coffin. I looked up at Mark. I decided to test him. "I see here in paragraph 4, you are citing the Uniform Power of Attorney Act 1, said, pointing a shaking finger at the paper. "But Washington State has specific statutes regarding the fiduciary duty of the agent, especially when it comes to real estate transfers. Did you file the supplementary disclosure form required by the state bar for conflict of interest?" The room went dead silent. Mark blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at Brandon in panic. He did not know what I was talking about because he was not a lawyer. He was probably a paralegal dropout, or just a friend of Brandon's from the bar who owned a suit. Well, Mark stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "That is implied in the general clause, Mr. Blackwood. We do not want to get bogged down in technicalities when time is of the essence. The law is flexible in emergencies." "The law is flexible." I almost laughed out loud. "The law is as flexible as concrete once it sets." This man was a clown. "Tom, honey," Lydia interrupted, placing her hand over mine. Her nails dug into my skin slightly. "Do not worry about the boring details. Mark knows what he is doing. We just need you to sign right here on the line. Do it for the family. Do it so we can sleep tonight." She thrust a heavy fountain pen into my hand. It was my own pen, a Mont Blanc I had received when I retired. It felt heavy and cold. Brandon was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on the pen tip. He was practically salivating. He could already see himself driving that Lamborghini. He could see himself evicting me and turning my home into his party palace. I held the pen over the paper. I let my hand hover there. I started to vibrate my hand, mimicking the tremors of Parkinson's disease, a condition I did not have, but one they were convinced was setting in because they wanted to believe I was weak. "Just sign it," Tom Brandon urged. "Right there." "I cannot steady my hand," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It is the stress. I am shaking so bad." "Here, let me help you," Lydia said, reaching for my hand to guide it. I knew I had to act. I could not sign this. But if I refused now, the mask would come off and things could get violent. There were 2 men in the room, and I was 70. I needed an accident. A clumsy old man accident. I reached for the glass of water with my left hand while holding the pen with my right. My hand shook violently. I made sure my knuckles hit the side of the heavy crystal glass. "Oops," I said. The glass tipped over. A full pint of water cascaded across the table. It hit the document like a tidal wave. The cheap printer ink on the paper was not waterproof. It smeared instantly. The paper turned into a soggy gray pulp within seconds. "Oh my God!" Lydia shrieked, jumping back to save her silk dress. "Jesus Christ!" Tom Brandon yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "Look what you did." I sat there looking at the ruined document, looking at the water dripping off the edge of the table onto Mark's cheap pants. I dropped the pen into the puddle on purpose. "I am so sorry," I mumbled, bowing my head to hide the smile that was threatening to break through. "I am just so clumsy. My hands, they do not work like they used to." Mark stood up, shaking water off his lap. He looked annoyed and exposed. The authority he was trying to project had dissolved along with the ink. "We have to print another one," Brandon snapped at him. "Do you have a copy in your briefcase?" Mark shook his head. "No. The printer at the library the printer at my office was out of toner. This was the only copy." "The library. He had printed my death warrant at the public library." Lydia glared at me. Her eyes were hard beads of hate. She knew this was a setback. It was late. They could not get another draft done tonight. "I am so tired, Lydia," I said, putting a hand to my forehead. "I think I need to lie down. This excitement is too much for my heart. We can do this tomorrow, right? The Russians will not come tonight, will they?" Lydia looked at the soggy mess on the table, then at Mark, who was awkwardly wiping his crotch with a napkin. She realized the mood was broken. The psychological pressure they had built up was gone, washed away by a glass of water. "Fine," she hissed. "Go to bed, Tom. We will do this first thing in the morning. And do not drink any coffee before you sign." I stood up, using the table for support, playing the part of the invalid until the very end. "Good night, Mark," I said. "Nice suit, by the way. Very shiny." I shuffled out of the room, leaving them in a puddle of their own incompetence. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I stopped shaking. My hands were as steady as a surgeon's. They had given me one more night. And one night was all I needed to bury them. Chào bạn tôi là Kung Da Trang. Tôi tiếp tục triển khai phân cảnh sáu sự thật tại ngân hàng, theo đúng mạch truyền và văn phòng ban yêu cầu. Nội dung dưới đây được viết liền mạch đi sâu vào nỗi đau của người xây dựng bị chính người thân rút ruột tối ưu cho giọng đọc AI. I left the house before the sun fully rose, telling Lydia through a closed door that I was going to the pharmacy to get medication for my shaking hands. It was the first lie I had told her in 5 years, and it tasted like ash in my mouth, but it bought me the time I needed. I drove straight to downtown Seattle, to the glass tower where Harrison had his offices. The city was waking up. I saw construction crews gathering on corners, drinking coffee and prepping their gear. I used to be one of them. I used to be the guy shouting orders over the roar of a generator. Now I was the old man in the expensive suit riding the elevator to the 40th floor to find out just how much of my life's work had been stolen. Harrison was waiting for me. He is a man of few words, which is why I like him. He did not offer me coffee. He knew I had had enough coffee to last a lifetime. He simply pointed to the leather chair opposite his desk and pushed a heavy stack of documents toward me. The room was silent high above the noise of the traffic. It was the kind of silence you find in a hospital waiting room before the doctor delivers the bad news. "It is worse than we thought," Tom Harrison said, his voice low and grave. "Much worse. I had the forensic accountant run the numbers overnight. The 200,000 I mentioned on the phone was just the tip of the iceberg." I put on my glasses. My hands were steady now. The act was over. I opened the file. The first page was a credit report. My credit score, which had been perfect for 40 years, had taken a nosedive. I flipped the page to see the cause. There were 3 new credit cards opened in the last 6 months. Platinum cards, black cards, the kind with limits that could buy a small house. "I did not open these," I said, pointing at the account numbers. "I have used the same debit card since 1990. "I know," Harrison said. "Look at the application forms." He slid another paper across the polished wood. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was my name. Thomas J. Blackwood. It looked almost exactly like my signature. Almost. But I saw the hesitation in the loops of the B and the W. I saw the slight tremor in the underline. It was a tracing. "Lydia," I whispered. "She has a light box for her watercolor painting. She must have put one of my old checks over a blank application form and traced it." "It is forgery," Tom Harrison said, "and it is federal mail fraud because she used the Postal Service to do it. But look at where the money went. That is the part that will make you sick." I turned the page to the transaction history. I expected to see jewelry stores. I expected to see travel agencies. And sure, there were plenty of those. But the bulk of the money, the massive 6-figure sum, was going to a company called B&L Home Solutions. "Who are B&L Home Solutions?" I asked. Harrison handed me a corporate registration printout. "The owners are listed as Brandon Miller and a silent partner. The registered address is a P.O. box in Tacoma." I looked back at the statements. Invoice for roof repair, $40,000. Invoice for foundation reinforcement, $60,000. Invoice for HE placement, $35,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt cold. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of a man who realizes he has been sleeping next to a parasite. They were billing me for repairs on my own house. Repairs that never happened. "I built that house, Harrison," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I laid the foundation myself in 1995. I hand-picked the cedar for the roof. I climbed up there last week to clean the gutters. The roof is perfect. The foundation is solid rock. There is nothing wrong with that house." "That is the genius of it," Harrison said grimly. "If they spent the money on Ferraris, it looks like theft. But by spending it on home repairs, they can claim they were increasing the value of the marital asset. They are laundering your money, Tom. They are taking cash from your credit line, paying it to Brandon's shell company, and then probably splitting the cash. They are stealing from you and claiming it is for your own good." I closed the file. I felt a physical pain in my chest right where the coffee had burned me. But this pain was deeper. It was in the bone. My house. That house was my masterpiece. It was the home I built for Sarah, my late wife. Every beam in that place was measured twice and cut once. I remembered carrying Sarah across the threshold. I remembered the smell of the sawdust and the fresh paint. I remembered saving every penny for 5 years to afford the land. That house was the physical manifestation of my love and my labor. and now Lydia and Brandon were eating it. They were like termites. They were burrowing into the walls of my life, unseen and silent, chewing away at the equity, chewing away at the stability I had worked so hard to provide. They did not respect the structure. They only saw it as food. They spent $200,000 on fake repairs, I said, staring out the window at the gray skyline. Do you know how much concrete I had to pour to earn $200,000 profit in the 80s? Do you know how many weekends I missed with my daughter before she moved away? That money is my life, Harrison. It is my time on this earth. And they stole it to buy champagne and rent sports cars. They are termites, I said aloud, the word tasting bitter. Just termites. We can go to the police, Harrison said. We have enough for an arrest warrant right now. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. I shook my head slowly. No, not yet. If we arrest them now, they will play the victim. Lydia will cry to the press. She will say she was managing the household finances because I am senile. She will say the repairs were necessary and I just forgot. She is good at lying, Harrison. She is better at lying than I am at building. Then what do you want to do? Harrison asked. I looked at the file. I looked at the signature that was not mine. I want to finish the job, I said. I want to cut off the food supply. I want to fumigate the house. Move the assets, Harrison. Every single dime. The stocks, the bonds, the savings. Transfer the deed of the house into the trust. I want to be a pauper on paper by 5 p.m. today. Harrison nodded and started typing furiously on his keyboard. And cancel the cards, I added. But do not just cancel them. Flag them for fraud. When they try to swipe that card next time, I want the machine to scream at them. I stood up. I felt lighter. The shock had passed, and now there was only determination. I was a contractor. When you find rot in a wall, you do not paint over it. You tear the wall down. You rip it out until you find the solid wood underneath. I am going back there, I said, putting on my coat. Are you sure that is safe? Harrison asked, looking concerned. I have to, I said. I have a performance to finish. I have to go sign a piece of paper with a shaking hand so they think they have won. I need them to feel safe for one more day. I need them to be so arrogant that they do not see the wrecking ball coming. I walked out of the office. I had lost $200,000. I had lost my wife. I had lost my stepson. But as I walked to the elevator, I realized I had found something I thought I had lost years ago. I had found my spine. I met the private investigator at the service entrance exactly 45 minutes after I left Harrison's office. His name was Vance, and he did not look like a detective from the movies. He looked like a cable repairman wearing a generic gray uniform and carrying a heavy tool belt. That was the point. If anyone saw him entering the house, he was just another worker coming to fix a faulty line in a house that was constantly being upgraded. I led him into the foyer, and the silence of the house felt heavy. Lydia was supposed to be at the spa for her weekly 4-hour deep tissue massage and facial package, a luxury that cost more than my first car. Brandon was supposedly out meeting investors, which I knew meant he was test driving the sports car he planned to rent with my money. We had the house to ourselves, but I still felt like an intruder. Vance worked with the efficiency of a surgeon. He did not ask questions about why a 70-year-old man was bugging his own home. He had seen it all before. He moved through the living room, installing a camera inside the smoke detector and another one disguised as a motion sensor for the alarm system. He placed a listening device behind the heavy oak bookshelf, drilling a tiny hole that was invisible to the naked eye. I watched him work, and I felt a wave of nausea. I was violating the sanctuary of my own marriage. I was turning my home into a prison panopticon. But then I touched the pocket of my jacket where the nursing home brochure was hidden, and the nausea turned back into cold resolve. This was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was just collecting the evidence. We moved to the master bedroom. This was the hardest part. This was the room where I slept. This was the room where I had held Lydia when her mother died. Now I was planting a mechanical eye to watch her betrayal. Vance was standing on a stepladder installing a camera inside the return air vent above the bed when the sound of a car engine cut through the silence. My blood ran cold. I knew the sound of that engine. It was Lydia's Mercedes SUV. She was back. She was 3 hours early. Vance froze on the ladder. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "We have a problem," I whispered. Vance jumped down from the ladder. He was fast. He grabbed his tool bag and the ladder. The front door beeped as the electronic lock disengaged. We had seconds. There was no way for him to get to the back door without crossing the foyer where Lydia was about to enter. Into the closet I hissed, pointing at the walk-in wardrobe that ran the length of the north wall. Vance scrambled inside, dragging his equipment with him. He pulled the sliding door shut just as I heard Lydia's heels clicking on the hardwood floor of the entryway. "Tom, are you home?" she called out. Her voice was sharp, suspicious. She must have seen my truck in the driveway. I looked around the room. It was a mess. There was a faint dusting of drywall powder on the carpet from where Vance had drilled. The air vent cover was slightly askew. If she looked up, she would see it. I had to distract her. I had to keep her eyes on the floor. I dropped to my knees instantly. I shoved my face near the legs of the velvet armchair in the corner of the room. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. If she found Vance here, if she found the cameras, the game was over. She would play the victim, she would call the police, she would say I was a paranoid abuser, and she would win. Lydia walked into the bedroom. I could smell her perfume before I saw her. It was the same heavy floral scent from breakfast, mixed with the sharp smell of ozone from the rain outside. "Tom, what on earth are you doing?" she asked. I did not look up immediately. I kept patting the carpet, pretending to search for something. My glasses. I grumbled, keeping my voice low and frustrated. I dropped my reading glasses. I heard them fall right here, but I cannot find the damn things. Lydia sighed. It was a sound of pure exasperation, a sound that said she was tired of dealing with an incompetent old man. "You are always losing things lately." "Tom," she said, walking further into the room. Her heels stopped just 3 feet from the closet door, where Vance was holding his breath. "Maybe you really do need a full-time caretaker." The threat hung in the air. A caretaker. Silver Meadows. I finally looked up, blinking as if I were confused. "Why are you back so early, Lydia? I thought you were at the spa until 2. "I canceled," she said, tossing her purse onto the bed. The vent above the bed was directly over her head. If she lay down and looked up, she would see the tiny black lens. "Why would you cancel?" I asked, trying to keep her talking, trying to keep her standing. "I have a migraine," she said, rubbing her temples. "And I had a bad feeling. I just felt like I needed to come home." Intuition. A predator's intuition. She sensed that the control was slipping away. "Help me look for these glasses, Lydia," I said pleadingly. "I cannot read the newspaper without them." She rolled her eyes. "I am not crawling on the floor in a Chanel dress, Tom. Turn on the lights." "No," I said quickly. My eyes hurt. The light makes my headache worse too. "Just help me look, please." She huffed and took a step toward the closet. My heart stopped. "I am going to change into my robe," she said, reaching for the handle of the sliding door. Panic surged through me. If she opened that door, she would be face to face with a man holding a drill. I had to do something drastic. I had to hurt myself. "Ow!" I yelled, grabbing my chest. Lydia froze her hand inches from the closet door. She spun around. "What? What is it?" "My chest." I gasped, slumping against the armchair. A sharp pain. Just a twinge. Maybe it is the indigestion. Or the stress. Lydia stared at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She was wondering if this was it. The big one. The heart attack that would solve all her problems. "Do you need your pills?" she asked. She did not move to help me. She just watched. "Yes," I wheezed. "They are in the kitchen, on the counter." "Please, Lydia." She hesitated. She looked at the closet, then back at me. The greed won. If I died right now, it was messy. She needed me to sign the papers tomorrow morning. She needed me alive for 24 more hours. "Stay there," she ordered. "Do not move." She turned and marched out of the bedroom, her heels clicking rapidly as she headed for the stairs. The moment she was out of sight, I scrambled up. "Go," I whispered to the closet door. Vance slid the door open. He was pale. He grabbed his bag. "The back stairs," I hissed, pointing to the servants' entrance that led to the kitchen pantry. "Go out through the garage." He nodded and vanished into the hallway, moving as silently as a ghost. I waited 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I heard the faint click of the garage service door closing. He was gone. I slumped back onto the floor, just as Lydia came rushing back in, holding the bottle of fake pills. "Here," she said, thrusting the bottle at me. "Take 2. I took the bottle. My hands were shaking for real this time. The adrenaline crash was brutal. I opened the bottle and pretended to swallow the sugar pills. "Thank you, Lydia," I said, leaning back against the chair. "That is better. The pain is passing." She stood over me, looking down with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "You really are falling apart, aren't you, Tom?" she said. I looked up at her. I looked at the vent above the bed. I looked at the smoke detector in the hallway. "Maybe I am," I said softly. "Maybe I am just getting too old for all of this." She smiled. It was a cold, shark-like smile. "Don't worry," she said, patting my head like I was a dog. "By tomorrow, everything will be taken care of. You will not have to worry about a thing." I closed my eyes. She was right. By tomorrow, everything would be taken care of. Later that afternoon, when Lydia was napping, I went to my study and opened my laptop. I entered the secure IP address Vance had given me. The screen flickered, and then 4 distinct feeds appeared. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and the master bedroom. The picture was crystal clear. I could hear Lydia's soft snoring through the speakers. I watched the screen mesmerized. I had turned my home into a trap. And now all I had to do was wait for the rats to come out and eat the cheese. I saw the front door open on the camera feed. Brandon walked in. He was holding a bottle of champagne. He walked straight to the living room and threw his keys on the sofa. "Mom," he yelled, "wake up! I got the car." I watched Lydia stir on the bedroom camera. I saw her sit up and check her phone. I sat back in my chair and took a sip of water. The eye was open. The recording light was blinking red. Action. "Chào bạn tôi là Kung Da Trang." Tôi tiếp tục triển khai, phân cảnh 8 lọ thuốc bị cháo, theo đúng mạch truyền và văn phong bạn yêu cầu. Nội dung dưới đây được viết liền mạch, tập trung vào khoảnh khắc kinh hoàng nhất của câu chuyện, khi bản chất của vụ việc chuyển từ lừa đảo sang ám sát. Văn bản đã được tối ưu cho giọng đọc AI không tiêu đề, không ký tu la. I sat in the darkness of my study, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of the laptop screen. My eyes were burning from staring at the pixels for too long, but I could not look away. It was like watching a horror movie, except the monster was wearing my wife's silk robe, and the haunted house was the one I had paid for. The timestamp on the video feed read 7:45 p.m. Lydia had gone into the kitchen ostensibly to make herself a cup of tea before bed. Brandon was out in the garage, probably admiring the car he thought he was going to rent. The house was quiet, but on the screen, the silence was deafening. I watched Lydia move around the kitchen island. She did not make tea. She walked straight to the cabinet above the espresso machine. That was where we kept the vitamins and the prescription medications. My heart skipped a beat in my chest. Not a figure of speech. My actual physical heart missed a rhythm. That cabinet contained my nitroglycerin tablets. The pills I needed if the angina pain became too much to bear. The pills that kept my blood flowing. Lydia took down the small amber bottle with my name on the label. She held it up to the light. On the high-definition camera feed, I could see the expression on her face. It was not the face of a loving wife checking her husband's supply. It was the face of a mechanic checking a part. Cold, clinical, detached. She set the bottle down on the counter. Then she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small plastic bag. I leaned closer to the screen, my nose almost touching the glass. What was that? It looked like a bag of candy. Small, round, white pellets. They looked like cake decorations, or maybe those little breath mints you get at cheap diners. I watched in paralyzed horror as she unscrewed the cap of my medicine bottle. She dumped the contents into her hand. Those were my real pills, the ones that could save my life in an emergency. She walked over to the sink and turned on the garbage disposal. She dropped my pills down the drain. I heard the phantom sound of the grinder in my head, chewing up my lifeline. She ran the water for a few seconds, washing away the evidence. Then she opened the plastic bag. One by one, she began to fill the amber bottle with the white candy pellets. They were the exact same size as my medication. To the naked eye in a panic during a heart attack, nobody would be able to tell the difference. She filled the bottle to the top, screwed the cap back on, and gave it a little shake. She smiled. It was a small smile. A private smile. The kind of smile you have when you finish a difficult puzzle. I fell back into my chair. The air left my lungs. This was not theft. This was not fraud. This was not about a credit card or a house or a Lamborghini. This was murder. My wife was planning to kill me. The realization hit me harder than the coffee she had thrown. It hit me harder than any physical blow I had ever taken in my life. The plan was terrifyingly simple. They were creating stress. They were pushing me. They knew I had a heart condition. They were banking on the fact that the confrontation with the lawyer tomorrow, or the threat of the loan sharks, would trigger an episode. And when I reached for that bottle, gasping for air, clutching my chest, praying for relief, I would be swallowing sugar. I would die on the floor of my own kitchen while they watched. And when the paramedics came, they would find a grieving widow and a bottle of pills that looked perfectly normal. Nobody would autopsy the pills. Nobody would suspect foul play. It would just be a sad end for an old man with a bad heart. I looked at my hands. They were trembling violently. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to swallow bile. I had slept next to this woman. I had held her hand. I had trusted her with my life. And all this time she had been waiting for me to die. And when I did not die fast enough, she decided to help nature along. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of shock. The woman I thought I knew did not exist. Lydia was a construct. She was a hollow shell, painted to look like a human being, but inside there was nothing but rot. She was worse than the termites I had imagined earlier. Termites just want wood. She wanted my soul. I looked back at the screen. Lydia put the bottle back in the cabinet. She closed the door. Then she finally turned on the kettle to make her tea. She moved with such casual grace. She hummed a little tune. I could see her lips moving. She was humming while she set the trap for my execution. I wanted to run downstairs and strangle her. I wanted to smash the laptop. I wanted to burn the house down with all of us inside. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, heavy stone in my gut. But I did not move. I was a builder, and a builder does not act on emotion. A builder follows the plan. If I went down there now, if I confronted her, she would deny it. She would say she was just organizing the cabinet. She would say I was hallucinating. She would say the pills were old. Without the bottle as evidence, without the video secured, it was just my word against hers. And she was good at playing the victim. Number 1. I needed that bottle. But more than that, I needed to survive. I realized then that the burn on my chest was a blessing. The coffee incident was a blessing. If she had not lost her temper, if she had not shown her hand early, I might have taken one of those pills tonight. I might be dead already. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my lungs. I checked the recording status. The video was saved to the cloud. I had the proof. Now I needed the physical evidence. I watched Lydia take her tea and leave the kitchen. She turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness on the screen. I waited. I waited for 10 minutes. I waited until I saw her enter the master bedroom on the other camera feed and get into bed. I waited until the rhythm of her breathing on the audio feed slowed down to a sleep cycle. Then I moved. I walked out of the study. The house was dark and silent. It felt like a tomb. I walked down the stairs, my hand sliding along the banister I had sanded and stained myself. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot to my ears. I reached the kitchen. I walked to the cabinet. My hand hovered over the handle. I was terrified. I was terrified that she would walk in. I was terrified that looking at that bottle would break me completely. I opened the cabinet. I took down the bottle. I unscrewed the cap and poured a single white pellet into my palm. I sniffed it. It smelled like peppermint. Sugar. Just sugar and peppermint. I squeezed the pellet in my hand until it crumbled into dust. I carefully poured the rest of the fake pills into a plastic bag I had brought from the study. I put the bag in my pocket. Then I took my backup supply of real medication, which I kept hidden in my travel bag in the coat closet, and I filled the amber bottle with the real pills. I put the bottle back on the shelf exactly where she had left it. If she checked, she would see the bottle was full. She would think her trap was still set. She would sleep soundly, thinking she had won. I walked back to the study. I locked the door. I sat down and sealed the bag of fake pills in an envelope. I wrote the date and time on the front. I looked at the envelope. It was the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. "I am not dying tomorrow, Lydia," I whispered to the empty room. "You are. The version of you that gets to walk around in society pretending to be a human being is going to die. And I am going to be the one who digs the grave." I turned off the laptop screen. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the chair watching the sun come up over Seattle, holding the envelope in my hand, waiting for the final act to begin. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when I found myself back in the leather chair of my study. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, but my mind was operating with a clarity I had not felt in years. The house was quiet in that heavy way that precedes a storm. I had my headphones on, plugged into the laptop, monitoring the audio feed from the living room. Lydia and Brandon were awake. They were sitting on the white sofa drinking mimosas. It was 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. Most people were at work. Most people were contributing something to society. But my wife and stepson were celebrating a victory they had not yet won. I turned up the volume. Their voices were crisp and clear, thanks to the high-quality microphones Vance had installed. "So did he take the bait?" Brandon asked, taking a long sip of his drink. "Hook, line, and sinker," Lydia replied. She laughed a sound that used to make me smile but now sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard. "He was shaking like a leaf last night. He is so afraid of these imaginary Russians. I almost felt bad for him." "Almost." Brandon snorted. "The old fool. He really thinks he is saving me, doesn't he? He thinks he is being the hero." "He is trying to buy your love," Lydia said, her voice dripping with cynicism. "That is what men like him do. They think money can fix everything. He knows you hate him, Brandon. He just thinks $50,000 will make you pretend to like him for a few more months. I gripped the armrest of my chair. My knuckles turned white. They knew. They knew I was trying to connect. They knew I was desperate for a family. And they were using that desperation as a weapon against me. So when does the big event happen? Brandon asked, leaning back and putting his feet up on the coffee table. My coffee table. The one I had restored by hand. Soon, Lydia said. I switched out the pills. The stress is at an all-time high. Between the lawyer coming back today and the threat of the mob he is going to crack. His heart is weak, Tom. It is a ticking time bomb. All we have to do is wait for the boom. And then we are rich, Brandon said, grinning. We are already rich, honey, Lydia corrected. But then we will be free. No more nursing him. No more listening to his boring stories about construction sites in the 80s. No more pretending to care about his stupid dog. I looked down at Jack, my old golden retriever, sleeping at my feet. He was the only honest soul in this house. What about the house? Brandon asked, looking around the room. Sell it, Lydia said instantly. It is too big. It is too old. And it smells like him. We will sell it and buy a penthouse in Bellevue. Something modern. Something without all this wood. Good, Brandon said. Because I already picked out my car. I leaned closer to the screen. A Lamborghini Huracan. Brandon said, his eyes lighting up with greed. Matte black. As soon as the old man kicks the bucket and the insurance money clears, I am putting down the cash. Can you imagine me rolling up to the club in that? I listened to them plan their future. A future built on my grave. A future funded by my life insurance and the sale of my legacy. They did not just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to wipe away every trace of Thomas Blackwood from the face of the earth and replace it with sports cars and penthouses. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was the last drop of my humanity leaving my body. The Thomas who loved Lydia was dead. The Thomas who wanted to be a father to Brandon was dead. They had killed him in that living room with their words. Now only the builder remained, and the builder had a demolition to schedule. I took off the headphones. I did not need to hear anymore. I had heard enough to condemn them 1,000 times over. I picked up my phone. I dialed Harrison's private number. He answered on the first ring. It is me, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It sounded like the voice of a stranger. Tom, are you okay? Harrison asked. You sound different. I am fine, I said. I am better than fine. I am awake. Listen to me, Harrison. We are not waiting. We are not negotiating. Activate Plan B. There was a pause on the line. Harrison knew what Plan B meant. It was the nuclear option. It was the scorched earth policy we had discussed only in hypothetical terms. Are you sure? Tom Harrison asked, his voice serious. Once I file this, there is no going back. The irrevocable trust locks everything down. You lose control of the assets, technically. You become a tenant in your own life, and they get nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not a cent. Not now, not when you die. It all goes to the charity and your daughter's estate. I looked at the screen one last time. Brandon was mimicking me, shaking his hands and making fun of my walk. Lydia was laughing so hard she spilled her mimosa on the rug. Do it, I said. Transfer the house. Transfer the savings. Transfer the investment portfolio. Empty the joint accounts. Leave exactly $100 in the checking account. $100, Harrison repeated. Yes, I said. Cab fare. In case they need a ride to the shelter. Consider it done, Harrison said. I am filing the electronic deeds now. The timestamp will be 9:15 a.m. By the time they finish their drinks, they will be trespassing on private corporate property. And Harrison, I added. Yes, Tom. Send the team, the security team, and bring the papers. I want to serve them myself. I will be there in an hour, Harrison said. Sit tight, Tom. Do not engage them yet. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. I had just given away my fortune. Millions of dollars. Gone. Signed away to a trust managed by a board of directors. I was technically a poor man now, but I felt richer than I had in years. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had started again, a gentle Seattle drizzle. I watched the drops race down the glass. They wanted a Lamborghini. They wanted a penthouse. They wanted me dead. Well, they were going to get a surprise. I was very much alive, and I was about to teach them a lesson that no amount of money could buy. I walked over to the small safe in the corner of the study. I spun the dial and opened the heavy steel door. I took out my old work boots, the ones with the steel toes and the dried concrete on the soles. I took off my slippers and put on the boots. I laced them up tight. Then I took out my old flannel shirt, the one with the holes in the elbows, the one Lydia hated because she said it made me look like a laborer. I took off my silk robe and put on the shirt. I looked in the mirror. The old man was gone. The victim was gone. The general contractor was back. I walked to the door of the study. I could still hear them laughing downstairs. Laugh while you can, I whispered, because the eviction notice is on its way. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, my heavy boots thudding against the floorboards with a sound of authority. I was not hiding anymore. I was not trembling. I was walking to inspect the job site one last time before the wrecking ball swung. It was 5 p.m. when the chaos finally left the building. Lydia and Brandon had spent 3 hours getting ready for a birthday gala at the yacht club, a party they were attending to celebrate Brandon's non-existent success. I watched from the top of the stairs as Lydia swanned around the foyer in a red silk gown that I knew cost $4,000. Because I had seen the charge on the statement Harrison showed me. Brandon was wearing a tuxedo that looked too tight around the chest, preening in the mirror and fixing his hair. They looked like royalty. They looked like they owned the world. And in their minds they did. They thought the old man upstairs was defeated, broken, and waiting to die. Tom, we are leaving. Lydia shouted up the stairs, not bothering to look at me. There is leftover pasta in the fridge. Do not wait up. Don't worry. Mom. Brandon laughed. He will be asleep by 7. Old people need their rest. I did not answer. I just stood in the shadows and watched the heavy front door close behind them. I listened to the sound of the lock engaging. I listened to their footsteps fading down the driveway. I waited until I heard the engine of the Mercedes start up and pull away. Then silence. The house was mine again, but it did not feel like mine. It felt like a museum of mistakes. I walked down the stairs, slowly, my hand trailing along the banister. I did not feel sad. I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was the feeling you get when you finally sign off on a demolition order. The structure is still standing, but in your mind, it is already gone. I walked into the kitchen. The first thing I saw was the coffee stain on the floor. It was still there near the island where she had thrown the mug 2 days ago. It had dried into a dark, ugly splotch on the expensive imported tile. Lydia had not cleaned it up. She had walked past it 100 times. To her, it wasn't dirt. It was a trophy. It was a reminder of her dominance. I stared at that stain. It was the foundation of my new life. I went to the garage and grabbed a single cardboard box. Just one. I did not need a moving truck. I did not want the furniture. I did not want the art on the walls. I did not want the crystal vases or the 70-inch televisions. That was their stuff. That was the facade. I walked through the house like a ghost, collecting the only things that mattered. First, I went to the guest room closet and took out my old leather tool belt. It was cracked and worn-stained with oil and sweat from 40 years ago. It smelled like sawdust and hard work. I ran my thumb over the brass buckle. This belt had built this house. This belt had fed my family. It was worth more than every piece of furniture in the living room combined. I placed it gently in the box. Next, I went to the mantel above the fireplace. I picked up the small silver frame tucked behind a gaudy vase Lydia had bought. It was a picture of Sarah, my first wife. We were standing in front of our first truck, laughing. Her hair was windblown and I was covered in mud. We looked tired, but we looked happy. I wiped a speck of dust from the glass. "I am sorry it took me so long to come back to you, Sarah," I whispered. "But I am coming home now." I put the photo in the box. Then I went to my study. I opened the safe and took out the deed to the plot of land I still owned up north near the Canadian border. It was just 10 acres of trees and a small cabin I had built with my own hands years ago. Lydia hated it. She called it a shack. She refused to go there. Perfect. I put the deed in the box. Finally, I walked to the corner of the room where Jack, my 12-year-old golden retriever, was sleeping on his bed. He lifted his head, his cloudy eyes looking at me with pure, unconditional love. He sensed the change in the atmosphere. Dogs always know when you are leaving. "Come on, boy," I said softly, snapping my fingers. "We are going for a ride. A long one." Jack struggled to his feet, his tail wagging slowly. He did not care where we were going. He just wanted to be with me. That was loyalty. That was family. I carried the box to the front door. Jack followed, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. I had one last thing to do. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was the divorce petition filed electronically an hour ago by Harrison, citing irreconcilable differences, adultery, fraud, and attempted murder. Next to it, I placed a small black USB drive. It contained the video files, the coffee incident, the conversation about the Lamborghini, and the pièce de résistance, the switching of the pills. I walked over to the kitchen island. I placed the envelope and the USB drive right in the center of the marble counter. I positioned them so they were pointing directly at the coffee stain on the floor. It was an installation art piece, cause and effect, crime and punishment. I took a Sharpie from my pocket and wrote a note on the outside of the envelope. For Lydia. The coffee is on me. I looked around the kitchen one last time. It was a beautiful kitchen. I had designed it myself, but now it looked cold. It looked like a stage set after the actors had gone home. I picked up the box. I whistled for Jack. "Let's go, buddy." We walked out the front door. The evening air was cool and smelled of rain and pine needles. It smelled like freedom. I did not lock the door. I wanted them to get in easily. I wanted them to walk in feeling safe, feeling victorious, only to find their lives dismantled on the kitchen counter. I walked to my old Ford pickup truck parked in the driveway. I had kept it all these years despite Lydia's constant nagging to sell it. She said it was an eyesore. She said it embarrassed her neighbors. I threw the box on the passenger seat. I lifted Jack up and settled him in the back. He put his head out the window, sniffing the wind. I climbed into the driver's seat. The seat was torn in one spot, and the steering wheel was worn smooth, but it fit my hands perfectly. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, settling into a steady, reliable rhythm. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the manicured lawn, or the fountain, or the life I had tried to buy. I put the truck in gear and drove down the long driveway. As I passed the gate, I hit the button on the remote to close it behind me. I watched in the rearview mirror as the iron gates swung shut, sealing the tomb. I turned onto the main road and headed north. I was 70 years old. I had a bad heart. I had lost millions of dollars. But as I merged onto the highway and felt the rumble of the road beneath my tires, I realized something. I was smiling. I reached over and patted Jack's head. "We are going to be okay, Jack," I said. "We are going to be just fine." The rain started to fall harder, washing away the dust, washing away the lies. I turned on the wipers and drove into the night, leaving Thomas Blackwood, the victim, behind, and taking Thomas Blackwood, the builder, into the future. While I was driving my old truck through the rain, finding peace for the first time in years, my wife and stepson were making their grand entrance at Le Sommet, the most exclusive restaurant in Seattle. I was not there to see it, but I know exactly what happened, because Henri the maitre d' is a man who values loyalty over money, and he recounted every delicious detail to me later. Lydia and Brandon walked in like they owned the place. They were seated at the best table in the house, right by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. It was the table I had reserved weeks ago for a business dinner, but Lydia had hijacked the reservation, claiming it was the perfect spot to celebrate Brandon's bright future. They ordered everything on the menu: caviar, truffles, Wagyu beef. They were eating my money with a voracious appetite, not realizing that the well had already run dry. Brandon was loud. He was drunk on power and the 3 martinis he had consumed before the appetizers even arrived. He was telling the waiter about his new Lamborghini, the one he had not actually rented yet, and how he was about to revolutionize the crypto market. Lydia just sat there smiling that tight, superior smile of hers, nodding at the neighboring tables, desperate to be seen, desperate to be envied. Then came the moment of truth. Brandon snapped his fingers at the sommelier. "Bring us the 1982 Petrus," he announced loud enough for the entire room to hear. "And make it quick. We are celebrating." The 1982 Petrus cost $5,000 a bottle. It was a wine I had only tasted once in my life, on the day I sold my first major development. It was a wine for kings, and Brandon, the boy who could not even change a tire, thought he deserved it for successfully scamming his stepfather. The sommelier hesitated for a fraction of a second, but he was a professional. He brought the bottle. He uncorked it with practiced grace. He poured a taste for Brandon. Brandon swirled it around in the glass, pretending to inspect the legs, pretending he knew the difference between a Petrus and a box wine. "Excellent," he declared. "Pour it." They drank. They laughed. They toasted to the future. To the penthouse in Bellevue. To the death of the old dinosaur. When the bill finally came, it was astronomical. $6,400. Brandon did not even look at it. He pulled out the black American Express card, the one he had stolen from my wallet earlier that week, the one he thought was his magic wand. He tossed it onto the silver tray with a flick of his wrist. "Put a 20% tip on there," he said magnanimously. "And keep the change." The waiter bowed and took the tray. Lydia and Brandon sat back, waiting for the receipt, waiting to sign their names on a fortune that was not theirs. They were probably discussing which club to hit next. They were probably already spending the inheritance in their heads. 10 minutes passed. The waiter did not return. Lydia checked her watch. "What is taking so long?" she muttered. "Service has really gone downhill here." Brandon waved his hand dismissively. "They are probably just intimidated by the limit on that card. It takes time to process greatness, Mom." Finally, the waiter returned. But he was not alone. He was accompanied by Henri, the general manager. Henri was a man I had known for 20 years. I had renovated his first house. I had helped his son get a job in construction during the summer. Henri was a friend, and Henri did not look happy. He walked up to the table, his face set in stone. He did not bow. He did not smile. He held the black card in his hand, like it was a piece of contaminated waste. "Is there a problem?" Brandon asked, annoyed that his victory lap was being interrupted. "There is a significant problem," Sir Henry said, his voice carrying through the hushed restaurant. "This card has been declined." Lydia laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Do not be ridiculous. Run it again. It is a Blackwood card. It does not get declined." "We ran it 3 times, Madame Henry said coldly. "The bank has flagged it as stolen." The word hung in the air. Stolen. Conversations at the nearby tables stopped. People turned to look. The elite of Seattle, the people Lydia was so desperate to impress, were now staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Stolen, Brandon shouted, standing up. His face was flushing red. Do you know who I am? I am Brandon Miller. That is my stepfather's card. He gave it to me. Call the bank right now and tell them to unblock it. I am afraid I cannot do that, Sir Henry said, not backing down an inch. The account holder, Mr. Thomas Blackwood, contacted us personally this afternoon. He informed us that several cards had been misappropriated by family members. He has reported them lost and authorized a complete freeze on all associated accounts. Lydia turned pale. Her hand went to her throat, clutching her pearls. Tom did what she whispered. He cut you off, Madame Henry said loud and clear. He has cut you off completely. This is a mistake, Brandon stammered. The old man is confused. He is senile. I have power of attorney. I have rights. You have a declined credit card, Henry said. Do you have another form of payment? Brandon fumbled for his wallet. He pulled out the backup card the Visa Lydia had forged. He thrust it at Henry. Try this one. And when it works, I am going to have you fired. Henry took the card. He walked over to the mobile terminal at the waiter's station, just a few feet away. The entire room watched in silence. Even the piano player had stopped playing. Beep. Declined. Henry walked back. Declined, he said, dropping the card onto the table. Also reported stolen. Lydia began to panic. She dug through her purse. She pulled out her personal debit card, the one attached to the joint checking account. Try mine, she hissed, tears of humiliation starting to well up in her eyes. Just pay the bill so we can leave. Henry swiped it. Declined. Insufficient funds, Henry announced. The room erupted in whispers. Insufficient funds. The ultimate sin in their world. That is impossible, Lydia shrieked, losing all composure. There was $40,000 in that account this morning, and now there is $100, Henry said. Mr. Blackwood transferred the balance to a trust fund at 4 p.m. today. Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. He sank back into his chair. The Petrus on the table suddenly looked like poison. So Henry said, crossing his arms, The bill is $6,400. How do you intend to pay? We do not have cash, Brandon mumbled. Not that much. Then I have a problem, Henry said. You have consumed $5,000 worth of wine and food that you cannot pay for. That is theft of services. I will write a check, Lydia said, reaching for her checkbook. I cannot accept a check from a frozen account, Henry said. Cash, or a valid credit card. Those are your options. We do not have it, Brandon yelled, throwing his napkin on the floor. Just bill us, send the bill to the house. I am afraid I cannot do that, Henry said, signaling to the security guard who had quietly appeared by the entrance. Given the fraud alert on your accounts, I have no guarantee of payment. Henry looked at his watch. I will give you 5 minutes to produce the money, he said. If you cannot, I will have to call the police. The police, Lydia gasped. You would not dare. We are the Blackwoods. You are the people who tried to spend Tom Blackwood's money without his permission, Henry corrected her. And Tom Blackwood is the one who built this restaurant. He is the one who fixed my roof when I was broke. You are just the people sitting in his chair. Henry turned to the room, addressing the other diners. I apologize for the disturbance, ladies and gentlemen. Please enjoy your evening. The drinks for the next round are on the house courtesy of Mr. Thomas Blackwood. The room broke into applause. Actual applause. They were cheering for me. They were cheering for the old man who had finally stood up for himself. Lydia and Brandon sat there frozen in the spotlight of their own shame. They had no money. They had no cards. They had no car waiting for them because the valet ticket was also charged to the room. They had to call Lydia's sister to bring cash. They had to sit there for 45 minutes while the rest of the restaurant ate and laughed and pointed. They had to endure the stares, the whispers, and the pity. And when the money finally arrived and they shuffled out of the restaurant, heads bowed, stripped of their dignity, they walked out into the rain to find that their Uber app wouldn't work because it was linked to the canceled card. They were stranded. They were broke. And for the first time in their lives, they were completely and utterly alone. I was miles away by then, watching the rain hit my windshield, but I felt the warmth of that moment. It was the warmth of justice, and it tasted better than any $5,000 bottle of wine ever could. The drive back to the house was a journey into the heart of darkness. I watched the dashcam footage from the Mercedes, later evidence seized during the legal proceedings, and the silence in that car was more violent than any scream. Lydia was gripping the steering wheel so hard, her knuckles were white against the leather. Her makeup was smeared from the tears of humiliation she had shed at the restaurant, but her eyes were dry now. They were hard, flinty stones fixed on the road ahead. She was not thinking about where she would sleep. She was thinking about revenge. In her twisted mind, I was the villain who had embarrassed her, and now I had to be punished. Brandon sat in the passenger seat, radiating a toxic mix of alcohol and aggression. He was punching his palm with his fist over and over again, psyching himself up for the violence he intended to unleash upon a 70-year-old man. "I am going to kill him," Brandon muttered, his voice slurred but deadly serious. "I am going to drag him out of bed, and I am going to beat him until he signs every check in that book. He thinks he can humiliate me in front of the whole city. He thinks he can lock the accounts. I will make him wish he was dead." "Just drive," Lydia snapped, pressing her foot harder on the accelerator. "We are going to fix this tonight. We will force him to sign the power of attorney. If he resists, we call the ambulance and tell them he is having a psychotic break. We will have him committed by morning." They sped through the rain, the tires slashing through the puddles on the dark, winding roads that led to the estate. They were fueled by a delusional confidence. They truly believed that the house was still theirs. They believed that I was cowering in my bedroom waiting for their judgment. They had no idea that the power dynamic had shifted tectonically while they were eating appetizers they could not pay for. They turned into the driveway, the headlights cutting through the gloom. And that was when they saw it. The headlights swept across the front lawn, illuminating a scene of absolute chaotic justice. The yard looked like a landfill of luxury. Lydia slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet gravel. She stared through the windshield, her mouth falling open in horror. There, scattered across the manicured grass, were their lives. Brandon's expensive golf clubs were lying in a mud puddle. His collection of limited edition sneakers, which he prized more than his own mother, were soaking up the relentless Seattle rain. Lydia's designer suitcases were piled in a heap, some of them open, spilling silk blouses and cashmere sweaters onto the wet earth. The oil paintings she had bought with my money to decorate her vanity room were leaning against the oak tree, the paint already starting to run in the downpour. "My stuff!" Brandon screamed, his voice cracking. "That is my stuff!" He threw the car door open and scrambled out into the rain. He slipped on the wet grass, falling onto his knees in the mud. But he scrambled up, running toward his possessions like a madman. Lydia stepped out slowly. She did not run. She stood by the car, the rain instantly plastering her expensive salon hair to her skull. She looked at the house. The windows were dark. The porch lights were off. It stood like a fortress, unyielding and silent. She marched toward the front door, stepping over a soaking wet fur coat that was lying on the walkway. She reached the massive double doors and punched the code into the electronic keypad. 12345. Beep. Red light. She frowned. She punched it again, harder this time. 12345. Beep. Red light. Access denied. She tried a third time, her fingers trembling so much she could barely hit the buttons. "Open the door." "Tom," she shrieked, pounding her fist against the wood. "I know you are in there. Open this door right now, or I will break it down." Brandon ran up behind her, holding a soggy pair of Jordans. He dropped them and threw his shoulder against the door. Thud. The door did not budge. It was solid oak reinforced with a steel core. I had built it to withstand a battering ram. "Let us in," Brandon roared, kicking the wood. Suddenly the porch lights flooded on, blinding them with a harsh white glare. They froze, shielding their eyes, thinking that I had finally capitulated. The door clicked. It opened slowly. Lydia stepped forward, a sneer forming on her lips, ready to unleash her fury. "Well, it is about time you—" Her voice died in her throat. It was not me standing in the doorway. It was Harrison. My lawyer was wearing a trench coat and holding a black umbrella. He stood tall and impassive, blocking the entrance like a gargoyle. Behind him, flanked on either side, were 2 uniformed police officers and 2 large men in private security uniforms. "Mr. Blackwood is not here," Harrison said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "And neither are you." "Who do you think you are?" Lydia screamed, trying to push past him. "Get out of my way! This is my house! I live here!" "Correction," Harrison said, holding up a hand. "You used to live here. As of 9:15 this morning, the title of this property was transferred to the Blackwood Irrevocable Trust. You are currently trespassing on corporate property." "Trespassing," Brandon laughed, a hysterical, wet sound. "Are you crazy? I am his son." "Well, stepson, that is my room upstairs." Harrison looked at Brandon with a mixture of pity and disgust. "We have packed your personal effects," he said, gesturing to the lawn. "Anything not removed from the premises in the next 30 minutes will be hauled away by a disposal crew." "You cannot do this," Lydia yelled, her face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. "I am his wife. I have rights. You cannot just kick a wife out on the street. It is illegal. I will sue you. I will sue Tom for every penny he has." "I anticipated you would say that," Harrison said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick envelope sealed in plastic to protect it from the rain. He handed it to the police officer on his right, who then stepped forward and thrust it into Lydia's hands. "Lydia Blackwood," Harrison said formally, "you are hereby served with a temporary restraining order issued by the King County Superior Court. You are ordered to stay 500 feet away from Thomas Blackwood and any property owned by the Blackwood Trust. Restraining order." Lydia scoffed, looking at the papers. "On what grounds?" "Because he got his feelings hurt. No judge will uphold this." "This is a joke." "It is not a joke," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "The order was granted based on emergency evidence submitted this afternoon. Evidence of financial fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder." The world seemed to stop spinning for Lydia. The rain hammered down on the roof of the porch, but she went stone still. "Attempted." What, she whispered. "We have the video," Lydia, Harrison said. "We have the video from the kitchen. We saw you empty the nitroglycerin pills. We saw you replace them with sugar pellets. We recovered the fake pills from the garbage disposal trap where you thought you washed them away. And we have the bottle you put back in the cabinet. The lab is analyzing it right now." Lydia's knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe to support herself, but the security guard stepped forward and pushed her hand away. That is a misunderstanding." She stammered, her eyes wide with terror. I was organizing." "You were plotting a homicide," Harrison said coldly. "The district attorney is reviewing the footage as we speak. I expect an arrest warrant will be issued within 24 hours. But for tonight, you are simply being evicted." Brandon stood there, mouth agape, the rain dripping off his nose. He looked from his mother to the police officers. The arrogance was gone. The toughness was gone. He was just a wet, scared boy who realized his free ride was over, but Where are we supposed to go? Brandon asked, his voice small. Harrison looked at him. He looked at the Lamborghini brochure sticking out of Brandon's pocket, now soggy and ruining the line of his tuxedo. I suggest you find a hotel, Harrison said. One that takes cash. Because your credit cards are dead, Brandon. Just like your inheritance. The police officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. You need to leave the property now, ma'am, the officer said to Lydia, or we will have to arrest you for violating the court order. Lydia looked into the house. She looked past Harrison into the warm, dry foyer where she used to hang her coat. She saw the life she had taken for granted. She saw the wealth she had tried to steal. And she saw the ghost of the man she had underestimated. She realized then that Tom Blackwood, the man she called a dinosaur, was the one who had survived the meteor. And she was the one going extinct. She turned around slowly. She looked at the pile of wet clothes on the lawn. She looked at her son, who was shivering in the cold. She let out a sob. It was a raw, ugly sound of defeat. Grab the suitcases, she hissed at Brandon. But Mom, it's raining! Brandon whined. Grab the damn suitcases, she screamed, her voice breaking. They spent the next 20 minutes scrambling in the mud, dragging their wet, heavy belongings to the trunk of the Mercedes. The security guards watched them impassively. Harrison stood on the porch under his umbrella, silent and watchful. When the trunk was full, they climbed back into the car. They were soaked to the bone. Their expensive clothes were ruined. Their dignity was gone. Lydia started the engine. She looked up at the house one last time. She looked at the camera lens hidden in the porch light, the eye of the man who had outsmarted her. She put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, the tires spinning in the mud. As they drove away into the dark, rainy night, the iron gates swung shut behind them with a final, definitive clang. Locked out. Cast out. And finally, exactly where they deserved to be. The silence in the cab of my truck was broken by the harsh electronic trill of the phone sitting on the passenger seat next to Jack. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. I knew because I had timed this moment perfectly. I had waited exactly 20 minutes from the time they pulled out of the driveway to make the anonymous call to the highway patrol. I had told the dispatcher to look in the glove compartment of a black Mercedes SUV with a specific license plate. I told them they would find a substantial amount of cocaine hidden inside a hollowed-out owner's manual. It was a trick Brandon had bragged about to his friends on the phone while I was listening in the study. He thought he was a gangster. He thought he was untouchable. Now he was about to learn that in the real world, actions have consequences, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute carries a mandatory sentence. I let the phone ring 3 times. The sound bounced off the metal interior of the truck, mixing with the rhythmic thrum of the windshield wipers. Jack lifted his head and whined softly, sensing the tension radiating from the device. I reached over and tapped the speakerphone button. I did not say hello. I just listened. The sound that filled the cab was primal. It was the sound of a woman whose world had not just cracked, but completely shattered. Lydia was screaming. In the background, I could hear the distinct wail of sirens and the squawk of police radios. I could hear Brandon shouting obscenities, crying out for his mother, like the child he really was. Tom, she screamed, her voice shredding in her throat. Tom, answer me. Oh God, Tom, please, they have him. They have Brandon. I kept my eyes on the road. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the wet asphalt and the towering pines of the Pacific Northwest. I drove at exactly the speed limit. Tom, are you there? She sobbed. They found drugs in the car. They are arresting him. They are putting him in handcuffs. You have to help us. You have to call the judge. You know people, Tom. Call Harrison. Tell them it is a mistake. I took a deep breath. The air in the truck smelled of old vinyl and wet dog. It was the smell of my past, and now it was the smell of my future. I cannot help you, Lydia, I said, my voice calm and steady. I do not have a lawyer anymore. Remember, I am just a confused old man. No, 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 she wailed. I did not mean it. I was angry. We can fix this. Tom, I love you. Please do not let them take my son. He is all I have. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The leather felt solid under my calloused hands. She did not love me. She did not love her son. She loved the safety we provided. She was watching her retirement plan being handcuffed and shoved into the back of a squad car, and she was terrified of the poverty that waited for her. He is an adult, Lydia, I said. He made his choices. He brought drugs into my house. He drove them in my car. He dug his own grave. Tom, please, she begged, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I will do anything. I will sign a postnuptial. I will sleep on the floor. Just come back. Turn the truck around. We need you. I need you. Who is going to take care of me? I slowed the truck down as I approached the on-ramp for the interstate. I thought about the coffee. I thought about the heat of the liquid hitting my chest. I thought about the blistered skin hidden under my shirt. I thought about the way she looked at me when she threw it. She did not see a human being. She saw an object that had malfunctioned. Lydia, listen to me very carefully, I said. I am listening, Tom. I am listening, she cried. Do you remember the coffee, I asked. What, she stammered, confused. The coffee. Yes. I am sorry about the coffee. It was an accident. It was not an accident, I said, cutting her off. It was a wake-up call. You threw that cup because you thought I was weak. You thought I was a golden goose that you could kick and abuse and I would still lay the eggs. You thought that because I am 70, I have no value left. You thought I was just a wallet with a heartbeat. Tom, please, she sobbed. But you forgot something, Lydia. I continued, my voice rising slightly, filled with the gravel of 50 years on construction sites. You forgot that before I was a rich man, I was a builder. And a builder knows that when the wood is rotten, you do not paint over it. You burn it. You threw hot coffee on me and you expected me to burn. But you were wrong. That coffee did not burn me. It washed away the fog. It woke me up. And now I am wide awake, Lydia. And I am looking at my life and I am seeing that the only thing wrong with it was you. Tom, don't hang up, she screamed, the panic rising again. Don't you dare hang up on me. I will die without you. I have nothing. You have exactly what you earned, I said. You have your freedom. You wanted me out of the picture so you could have the money. Well, now you have me out of the picture. Enjoy the silence, Lydia. And when you are sitting in that jail cell waiting to visit your son, think about that coffee stain on the kitchen floor. Because that stain is the only legacy you left behind. I did not wait for her to answer. I reached over and pressed the red button on the screen. The screaming stopped instantly. The sirens cut off. The cabin was silent again, save for the hum of the engine and the sound of Jack shifting on the seat. I picked up the phone one last time. I went to the contact list. I found Lydia. I pressed block. I found Brandon. I pressed block. I rolled down the window. The cold night air rushed in, stinging my face, making me feel alive. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of rain and pine. I was 70 years old. My bank accounts were frozen. My house was gone. My marriage was ashes. To the world, I was a man who had lost everything. But as I looked out at the road stretching ahead of me, disappearing into the darkness, I did not feel loss. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The weight of the pretense was gone. The weight of trying to please people who despised me was gone. I looked over at Jack. He was sitting up now, looking at me with his tongue lolling out. "It is just you and me now, partner," I said to him. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The old truck surged forward, the V8 engine roaring a defiant song. We were not going to a hotel. We were going north to the cabin. I had tools in the back. I had wood to chop. I had a roof to fix. I had work to do. And for the first time in a long time, the work was for me. I was not building a legacy for an ungrateful son. I was not maintaining a lifestyle for a greedy wife. I was building a sanctuary for Thomas Blackwood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stick of gum. I unwrapped it and popped it into my mouth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were not the tired, sad eyes of the man who sat at that kitchen island yesterday. They were the sharp, clear eyes of the man who had built half of Seattle. I might have been poorer in dollars, but I was the richest man on that highway. I had my dignity. I had my dog. And most importantly, had the courage to walk away. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror, turning into a blur of meaningless glitter. I did not look back. I drove into the darkness, chasing the dawn that I knew was waiting for me on the other side. The road was long, but I was ready. I was Tom Blackwood, and I was just getting started. This story is a harsh reminder that we teach people how to treat us. For years, Tom allowed his family to view him as a resource rather than a person, believing that his generosity would eventually buy their love and respect. But love cannot be bought, and respect that is paid for is just flattery. The moment you tolerate disrespect, you set a standard for your relationships. Tom's journey teaches us that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. No matter your age or your situation, walking away from toxicity is not a defeat, it is the ultimate victory. Your self-worth is not defined by what you provide for others, but by what you refuse to accept from them. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to walk away from someone you loved to save yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever felt used by the people closest to you? Let me know your story in the comments below, because your experience might just give someone else the courage to stand up for themselves. See you in the next story. Stay strong.